about working, you worked with Ron Paul and other conservative or libertarian leading congressmen, who are some of the guys you like and what's it like working with them, and then just, talk about, the Ron Paul retirement banquet, you got invited to that, and what was the experience there, and what kind of example or legacy do you think Ron Paul has on Congress, or, has he changed anything, or do you think it's still kind of business as usual there? We can get into, what's your philosophy of dealing with, bills in Congress, or how do you approach legislation? And that's basically it. So
let's go through those one at a time.
So it's not really going to be back and forth. I'll just ask the question, and then you just go, and then I'll get to the next one. And we can edit it too, so if you want, if we make a mistake or something. So, you ready to go?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're recording?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. So, Congressman Labrador, please talk about, you worked with Ron Paul for a couple of years in Congress, and there are some new, very conservative or libertarian-leaning congresspeople. What was it like working with people of, similar ideology and people more out of the mainstream of the establishment?
It was a real tremendous pleasure to work with Ron Paul. He was, he's a very quiet man. He's actually, as you know, not a very flashy guy. He's not out there trying to make a name for himself. He's one of those few people who was able to make a name of himself by his principles, by just standing for something for a long period of time. And that's how people started following him. The most interesting thing was on our first major vote on any kind of legislation that dealt with civil liberties. It was actually the reauthorization of the Patriot Act. Our leadership was surprised because it actually went down. The first vote, they did it on a special calendar where you need 2/3 votes, and they thought, oh, every Republican's going to vote for this, so it's not a big deal. And there were I don't remember the number, but there was quite a substantial number of Republicans who voted against it. And that was, I think, the first time that our leadership realized that maybe a few of us have more libertarian leanings than the old guard of the Republican Party. It came back on a regular vote and it passed, but there was still, I can't recall the number, but it was a substantial number, maybe between 30 and 40 congressmen who voted against it. And if you recall, when Ron Paul first voted against the Patriot Act, it was just 3 who voted against the original Patriot Act. So there's quite a few of us who have libertarian tendencies. As you and I have always talked, I'm not a libertarian. I'm not a strict libertarian. I always consider myself a conservative with libertarian leanings. And there's many of us who kind of fit that bill in the House of Representatives, and of course you have Rand Paul in the Senate and Mike Lee and others in the Senate. And what we've done, we've created a Liberty Caucus that is actually both houses meet, and we meet about once or twice a month on different issues that are pending before the House and the Senate.
Is it easier to, take hard positions, unpopular positions? Is it easier when there's a lot of you doing it together? Does that help boost morale to stand up?
I don't know. For me, it doesn't matter. I would do it even if I was just the only one standing there. What it makes it easier is that sometimes you miss certain things. There's so many bills that come before Congress. And if all of you are reading the bills, there's certain things that you see that maybe somebody else hasn't seen, or vice versa. Somebody else sees something in the bill that you don't see. So we kind of support each other in that way. When somebody like Justin Amash will come to me and tell me, well, have you seen this in this bill? Then it's something that I can actually take note of it, even though I may not have seen it in my original review of the bill.
So after several terms in Congress, 3 presidential runs, Ron Paul finally retired his seat in Congress. There was a bit of a retirement party. Yes. You were a part of that. Tell us about that experience.
It was a great evening. It was put together by his son and by many of the liberty-minded people in Congress, and it was really a fun evening. Everyone had an opportunity to speak and to say, give an anecdote of how they had worked with Ron Paul in the past. And in my experience, I actually hadn't had a lot of experience working with him. So what I did is I shared with him something that he didn't know before. That I shared with him how the only reason I was a member of Congress, I believed, was because I was able to work with the liberty groups here in Idaho. And I told him how I believe that it's such an important movement in Idaho because, as you know, it's not the majority of the Republican Party. But when the liberty-minded folks in the party join with the other conservatives, we actually have a clear majority in all the issues that we're working on. And when we separate, when we divide on the issues, we don't have that majority anymore. So I was able to tell him about the coalitions that are being built in Idaho and how important those coalitions are. And I gave the groups a lot of credit for my victory. I know that I would have had a much harder time winning office if I had not been able to coalesce all these conservative groups. It wasn't just the liberty groups themselves, but it was all the conservative groups were able to work together. And we've done that on many other issues. When, the leadership of the party, things that have happened in the House in the legislature here. When we all work together, we actually have had some pretty amazing victories together.
What kind of legacy do you think that Ron Paul and his movement is going to leave on Congress? There seem to be a lot of newly elected officials who kind of rode in on wave of his support. Is he changing Congress, or is it like a lot of people think, just hopelessly corrupt and deadlocked, and nothing's ever going to change? How do you see it?
I think there's some change. It's still, I don't think anything is hopelessly corrupt, or else I wouldn't be in it. I'm still optimistic. But I think you see in people like Justin Amash and Tom Massey and people like myself sort of a less mainstream Republican view of the way that things should be happening in Washington, D.C., and a more of a libertarian-leaning view on the way things should be happening in Washington, D.C. And I think you see a significant number of young Republicans who feel that way. And many of us were not even per se Ron Paul supporters or Ron Paul followers. But we were people who admired his tenacity, who admired his intellect, who admired what he stood for. And even though we may not have been out there at the forefront of his movement, we want to have the same kind of legacy that he's had as a congressman. So I think you see that movement growing and getting bigger in Washington, not smaller.
What's your personal philosophy of how you approach legislation and proposed bills? What sort of process do you go through deciding how to vote on different proposals?
Well, it's pretty simple. You first look at whether it's constitutional. You then look at whether it's going to serve your constituents. And then you last look at whether it's the right thing to do, whether your conscience, is dictating that that's the right policy for your constituents. And you have to go through that analysis constantly. Not every bill is a clear, yes or no. There are some bills, unfortunately, that you think, well, it's good, but it's not great, and you have to make a decision whether you're going to make, the great the enemy of the good, and those are some of the areas where you struggle. But the Constitution has to be foremost what we look at. Whether government has, specifically the federal government, has the right and the ability to actually transact in that area.
In light of recent headlines regarding Speaker Boehner, maybe talk about your relationship with Congressman Amash, and that relationship was in the headlines. Are you guys congressional buddies?
We're really good friends. We sit on the House floor together a lot. We actually talk to each other about issues. But I have a lot of good friends in Washington. I think Congressman Amash and I have become good friends because he's a little bit younger than I am, and he and I have been able to talk to him about my experience as a legislator, some of the things that he did as a legislator, and sort of helping him go out there and use his voice in a more effective, powerful way. He's a very smart congressman. And one of the things that I think Ron Paul needed to learn that he never learned, and I don't think he wanted to, was how to make his ideas become a reality. He was kind of a loner in Washington. And I think our job as this new next generation of more libertarian-minded conservatives, we need to not just talk about our libertarian positions, but kind of make those the policy of the party and of the United States. And I think that's where Justin and I have these discussions quite a bit. And you see that, there's a pragmatism to Rand Paul right now, where he's realizing that maybe some of the positions that his father took were maybe a little bit too extreme or not as articulated as effectively as possible. And he's trying to make this movement, this ideology, something that is maybe more approachable. And I think with some of the younger conservatives and libertarians, I think that's where you're going to be able to expand the number of people that believe in that have that mindset.
Was it a surprise for you when Congressman Amash said your name when the roll call for the new speaker?
It wasn't a surprise because he turned to me just a minute before he did it and said, "I'm going to do this. Are you okay with that?" So I knew he was going to do it, but it was a surprise when he told me he was going to do that. And it's not something I was seeking. It's not something that I wanted. At this rate, in 200 years, I will be the Speaker of the House, because if I get one vote every 2 years, I'm pretty close.
You can't always control what your friends are going to do.
No,
right?
you can't. You can't. He's a great guy, though. He's, and actually, I'm proud to call him a friend, and I'm proud of what we did. I think you will see the party needed a wake-up call, and I think this little bit of a shake-up has actually given some people in our leadership more of a backbone, which is all we were asking for.
Pause it there.